this presentation is about the paper I published in 2021, and not much has changed since then. But my focus was really to highlight what is the true strength of the decentralized Swiss economic system when it comes to building resilience, but also contributing to the inclusion of migrants and also having a positive impact on migrants going back to their country to invest. So first, I will talk about productive ecosystems, economic ecosystems in Switzerland. And with productive, I mean those who really apply precision knowledge to create what Switzerland is famous for, namely all these high quality products, all this Swiss finish that is so important also for the export culture. Then what happens if they fall into a crisis, an external shock? How do they respond? We will hear more about this also tomorrow in Baden, where it's really the world of practice. And then I will move on to how migrants are involved in this process of building up these decentralized economics ecosystems in Switzerland and how they contribute to the UN SDGs without probably having ever heard from them. And the importance of trust, consisting of bridging social capital and bonding social capital. Bonding is the philosophy: we know each other and we monitor each other, and whatever we don't have here, the competences we recruit from elsewhere, and that's the bridging capital. And often it's argued, well, one goes at the expense of the other, but as we will see in Switzerland, that's not the case. Understanding the internal logic of business, this is so important if we want to design policies that are actually conducive to sustainable and inclusive change. We need to understand how these decentralized ecosystems work. So what do I mean with productive economic ecosystems? There is this classic assumption, well, I read it also when you go to AI, or the industrial centers of Switzerland are located in the metropolitan regions of Geneva, Basel, and Zurich. But if you look at the statistics in Switzerland, manufacturing industries tend to move outside urban centers in the past 2 decades. So there, the growth of manufacturing centers you see, and where they decreased, often they decreased exactly in the urban centers, and they moved out into more rural areas. And that's why it's not surprising that we find the most innovative companies in Switzerland often not in the urban centers, but outside. So the urban centers, they will remain important, of course, and they attract young people, they attract a lot of services, but it's mostly a tertiary economy based on services. And that also can become a problem, because if they're not familiar anymore with how the value is created in the economy, if they're just becoming consumers, then there may be also an under-appreciation of this decentralization of the economy, of the productive economy. And with this, I mean, it's a decentralization of precision knowledge and know-how to generate scalable innovation. We increasingly lose this in these urban centers because it's moving out somewhere, and it's then losing attention, public attention. But ultimately, it's the foundation of Switzerland and its value creation. So decentralized economic ecosystems are the drivers of economic resilience in this country through continuous innovation. We will see that in the case of Baden, which has managed this transition to Industry 4.0, hardly noticed by anyone, but it's one of the leading high-tech production clusters in Europe. And in this context, it's also sort of the economic foundation of Switzerland. But I will also talk about another region, the region of Monte. It's at the border of the Valais, Canton de Vaud, Canton de Valais. I'm in the jury of the Swiss Family Business Award, so every year we have the opportunity to visit 3 of the selected companies, and I'm always impressed. This company, Bühler Entreprise Monte, it didn't win, but I was very impressed by this small company. Or small, it has about 50, 60 employees, and it's part of this flourishing economic ecosystem of Monte. To understand how this emerged, we need to go back to the 19th century. Monte has a lot of water, it has a salt mine, it has gypsum. And this was very important for the chemical industry back then. And the Basler Chemie had actually its roots there. That's where they started to produce their chemicals, because salt was important, water, and the transportation ways. And around these investments, a lot of companies emerged in the region that served these foreign direct investments. And they constantly learned on the job by solving problems for these multinationals. It's not just Novartis, and then eventually Syngenta, but it's also Huntsman, it's Gypsum, it's a couple of other big multinationals who produce chemicals there. And the small SMEs, they face these constraints. They have scarce resources. They search for skilled labor, it's not a very attractive region to go there. But so they also invest in their own people, of course. And they're more exposed to external shocks than other players who can diversify all the time, the bigger they are. And so what is their response? They invest in specialized technical skills. So if they cannot recruit the people, they train their people, they upgrade their people. Then that's an interesting example. They were providing electrical installations to these big manufacturing companies, but also to Tamoil, the oil refinery, that 10% of their revenues they generated by serving Tamoil. Tamoil went suddenly bankrupt. It was closed. And then they reinvented themselves as a renewable energy company, building solar cells and electrical installations in regard to renewable energy. So it's opportunistic, but at the same time, they are part of the solution. So resilience means continuous incremental innovation, learning on the job. And they eventually became nationally known for their turnkey solutions for electrical installations. So they went far beyond their own little region. So the vast majority of innovation in Switzerland is actually customer driven. It's often independent of universities, but it doesn't get the attention because there is this implicit assumption it must always come from a university and then applied somewhere in the economy. But the economy is actually innovating as well because that's the only way they can stay in the market in Switzerland. And it generates positive externalities for society and the environment because often these are also solutions that help address an environmental problem. And then BEM is also very good in inclusive migration. They make them part of the solution. And that applies to the whole region of Monte. It increased from a population of 8,000 in the 1960s to a population of almost 20,000 in 2020. It has more jobs than inhabitants. Migration, it has a share of migrants of 32%. The national average is 25%. It's also higher, I think, than the metropolitan area of Zurich. It just shows that they have been very successfully integrated. But it also applies to Switzerland as a whole. Historically, the export-oriented Swiss economy was co-created by migrants. We heard it from also Ian Roberts, or from the founders of ABB, of Nestle, of many large Swiss companies in the 19th century. These were migrants who had an entrepreneurial mindset and were starting a business in Switzerland, which actually became then almost an example of Swiss values and culture, even though these were integrated migrants. So the impact on inclusive migration is double in a sense. Swiss companies also invest abroad, and they often put their talented local employed migrants in charge of an investment project elsewhere. And it was very interesting. My wife was here also there. We had once an event here with Geberit, and she introduced herself as from Ethiopia. And then 2 days later, they contacted her if she would be interested in being the development consultant in Ethiopia because they would like to set up business there. So, well, I'm here now, but I know a friend of mine who graduated with me in architecture in Addis Ababa. Why don't you contact her? 2 months later, she was in Rapperswil going through a training, and she came to visit us, and she told my wife, Nigis, we are doing everything wrong. She was so excited about all the knowledge, and then she went back and she set up her business there. And it's all going through informal channels. That's what is very interesting here. And also migrants acquire skills, working culture, and capital in local businesses. A lot of people, young people who move out of the Swiss villages are replaced by migrants who set up shop there, earn a good living. I remember my dad is a dentist, and his dental assistant was from Kosovo. Her husband had a garage. They bought the building in Solothurn, and then they sold it. They went back to Kosovo, and they have created a little business empire there now. And so this is all hardly, I mean, you see it in the statistics, but you don't, often the stories are not known behind it. So local SMEs, as well as migrant workers, are not passive victims, but actually active agents of sustainable and inclusive change. And they succeed through this pragmatic bonding. They're not trusting each other because they share the same religion or the same culture. They trust each other because they're reliable and they meet their expectations. So the bonding capital means, and you hear that with every important agent in these decentralized economic ecosystems, we know each other well here. And everyone who doesn't play by the rules may get excluded from the network. So there is a self-disciplining character in this. And it also reduces transaction costs. If you know this guy doesn't deliver, but this one delivers, then there is the peer pressure there that helps you to really get things done. But then a lot of competencies and knowledge they lack. So they go out, they go to international fairs, they reach out to well-known specialized firms who could complement their competencies. And then, of course, there's always trust and then conflict and then eventually a commitment. And when once results are produced, that affects again the pragmatic trust in this kind of collaboration. So it's integrating out-group agents into the in-group network. It's sharing a common and pragmatic solution-oriented trust culture that is constantly on the watch regarding trends, technologies, and opportunities. It's also an effective joint response to local social and economic crisis. We saw that in the joint action during the COVID-19 crisis in Monte. All the chemical companies were producing immediately disinfectants for the local people for free and so on. So they felt being part of this community that carries them. And that's the crucial issue here. Business cannot be seen as apart from society. It's definitely an integrated part. And Monte and all these other regions, and especially Baden, we will see tomorrow, it has this same pragmatic bonding culture where people know we're all in the same boat. We cannot just pitch us against them. We have to reach out to them. We have to find compromise. We have to be pragmatic. And that's the last slide. I mean, I mentioned him already in my introductory remark, Niklas Luhmann, ecological communication, where he says we should understand what the self-referential logic is of business. It's about business practices understood as sort of self-stabilization through the routine applications of what has been tried and tested. They build on a knowledge stock, and they would continue to do what if no external shock happens, they would prefer to do what they do best. But then, of course, eventually shocks happen, and they have to. Well, there is always this risk of excess of just focusing on the reproduction of what has worked before, but that's not exclusive to business. It also applies to the academic system, it applies to government systems, and so on. And then comes the crisis, which rings the alarm bells, and you're forced to test out new things, and eventually you get out stronger of the crisis because you were forced to reach out to look for solutions elsewhere and then emerge through innovation. So, and here I had a discussion also with, I think, Janet before, saying you cannot just say science and business, they produce the solutions through innovations, and you can ignoring the importance of regulation. No, I'm not ignoring this. I'm just arguing if it comes to an emerging risk, you have maybe an NGO who detects it and who protests. It creates pressure on public policy to respond through regulation. But business can then not just respond through self-regulation. If they want to stay in business, they have to respond through innovation. And that can ultimately also benefit society and the environment. So policymakers need to understand the constraints in which companies operate to create a resonance in positive ways. So it's not just sufficient, as Dr. Niklas Luhmann argued, to try to change their attitudes through moral appeals. It doesn't create this resonance. It actually often discourages the direction of solution-oriented innovation because companies think, okay, I can get some, through policy advocacy, I can get what I could not get otherwise. We at our institute, and I will not go into detail here, but we applied this philosophy when we developed this ESG to go sustainability rating tool for SMEs. It was an iterative process with them. We constantly checked with them, what kind of data do you have? What is the easiest way of getting this raw data and entering it into our online platform? And then eventually, through a calibrated benchmarking system, they knew in 10 key areas, where do I stand compared to my peers? So it gave them for the first time an impression, where do I stand? And then through AI and other electronic consulting tools, they could get advice on how to move on. There are now 1,300 companies in Switzerland who are happy with the tool, who lobby for us that if they do something, they want to do this because it's low bureaucracy, low price, and we don't have any conflict of interest. And it makes us very proud. It's sort of a test ground of this philosophy, which we're also applying at our institute. So that's from my part. Thank you very much.